The rain hammered against the windows of the old military archive building on Dranis. Inside, dust particles floated through beams of artificial light as Mira adjusted her recording equipment one more time. She had spent 3 years trying to get this interview, sending requests that were ignored or rejected with polite excuses. Now finally, Reth had agreed to speak with her. He arrived exactly on time, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body remembered too many injuries. Reth's scaled skin bore the faded purple marks of old burns, and his left eye had been replaced with a mechanical one that whirred softly as it focused. He lowered himself into the chair across from Mira without greeting her, studying the recording devices with obvious distrust. "Before we begin," Reth said, his voice rough like gravel scraping metal, "you should know that what you've read in the official histories is propaganda. Clean stories for clean minds. What actually happened during the human wars was something else entirely." Mira nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "I want the truth. That's why I'm here." Reth made a clicking sound that might have been amusement or disdain. "The truth. Everyone wants the truth until they hear it. Then they wish they'd stayed ignorant." He leaned back, his mechanical eye dimming slightly. "But I agreed to this, so let's begin. What do you want to know?" "Start at the beginning," Mira said. "When did you first hear about humans?" 52 years ago, Reth replied without hesitation. "I was part of the Coalition 7th Fleet, stationed at the edge of what we called the expansion zone. My commander gathered us in the briefing hall and told us we'd be deploying to bring a newly discovered species into the Coalition. Standard procedure back then. We'd done it 40 times before." Mira activated her recording system. "What did they tell you about humans?" "That they were primitives," Reth said, and something dark crossed his expression. "They'd barely left their own planet, still used chemical combustion for most of their technology. Our scouts reported they had split into different tribal nations that fought each other over resources and ideology. The intelligence officers laughed about it. They said humans were typical deathworlders, aggressive and short-lived, but nothing we couldn't handle." "Deathworlders?" Mira asked, though she knew the term. "Species that evolve on planets with hostile environments," Reth explained. "High gravity, dangerous predators, extreme weather. These conditions make them physically tough, but usually limit their technological development. They spend too much energy just surviving to advance quickly. Or so we thought." He paused, his working eye focusing on something far away. "We were so wrong about that." Reth described how the Coalition sent first contact delegations to Earth with the standard offer: join the galactic community, share technology and resources, accept Coalition governance. The humans received the delegation politely, asked for time to discuss among their various nations, and then gave their answer. They refused. "The Coalition doesn't handle refusal well," Reth continued. "We'd spent 10,000 years bringing order to the galaxy. Every species eventually understood that joining was in their best interest. The few who resisted at first always surrendered after a small demonstration of our military superiority. The Council decided humans needed that demonstration." Mira watched Reth's hands as he spoke. They had begun to tremble slightly, though his voice remained steady. "That's when they deployed your fleet?" 3 months after first contact," Reth confirmed. "We gathered at the staging point. 200 ships carrying ground forces, support personnel, occupation specialists. I was a squad leader then, young and confident. We'd trained for urban pacification, resource point securing, resistance suppression, everything by the manual. Everything perfect." His mechanical eye brightened again, focusing sharply on Mira. "Do you know what our commanders told us the night before we jumped to Earth?" Mira shook her head. "They said we'd be home within 2 weeks, that humans would surrender as soon as they saw our fleet in orbit, that the operation was really just a formality, a way to let humans save face by showing they'd been overwhelmed by superior force. We actually felt sorry for them." Reth's voice dropped lower. "That was the last time any of us felt sorry for humans." The old soldier stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. "When we dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of their solar system, everything seemed to match our intelligence. Earth was there, blue and green and completely undefended. No orbital stations, no weapon platforms, no fleet waiting for us. Our admiral was annoyed. He'd expected at least a token resistance, something to justify the operation. Instead, it looked like we'd traveled all this way to intimidate a species that didn't even have basic space defenses." "But that wasn't true," Mira said quietly. "No," Reth agreed. "That wasn't true at all. We started moving in system. following standard approach patterns. Humans had one natural satellite orbiting their planet, a large moon. Our sensors detected some artificial structures on the far side of it, probably research stations or mining operations. Nothing threatening. We ignored them. He turned back to face Mira, and she saw something in his expression that made her skin prickle despite the warm room. That was our first mistake. Humans don't put their weapons where you expect them. They don't follow the patterns we'd seen in every other species. They don't think the way we thought intelligent beings should think. And that's what makes them so dangerous. What happened? Mira asked. We got about halfway to Earth when our sensors started picking up energy signatures. Not from the planet or the moon, but from the asteroids in the outer system. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Our tactical officer reported they were moving, accelerating toward us on intercept courses. The Admiral ordered evasive maneuvers, but he wasn't worried yet. Asteroids are just rocks. Our shields could handle impacts from small debris. Reth's hands had stopped trembling now, but his voice had taken on a hollow quality. Then those rocks started shooting at us. Humans had put weapons on asteroids. Not just any weapons. Railguns powered by solar collectors they'd hidden in plain sight. Simple technology. Nothing exotic, but effective. More effective than it should have been because we never thought to scan for it. Why would we? Who weaponizes asteroids? The first human attack destroyed 6 coalition ships before the fleet even understood what was happening. The Admiral ordered an immediate advance to Earth, thinking the orbital space around the planet would be safer. Instead, the fleet ran into a second line of defense. Satellites that had been positioned years earlier. Small and quiet and full of explosives that detonated when coalition ships passed nearby. We lost 30 ships before we reached low orbit, Reth said. 30 ships destroyed by what we'd called primitive technology. The Admiral was furious, but also confused. How had humans known we were coming? How had they prepared defenses? We hadn't detected any long-range sensors, no surveillance equipment. It didn't make sense. Mira knew the answer from her research, but she let Reth continue. Later, after everything, we learned the truth. Humans had been listening to space for hundreds of years, long before they could travel through it. They'd detected coalition transmissions decades before we found them. They knew we existed. They'd been watching us, learning our languages, studying our technology, preparing for the day we'd arrive. While we thought they were primitive and isolated, they were getting ready for war. The old soldier returned to his chair, moving even more carefully than before. The Admiral ordered landing parties to secure the surface. That's where I entered the story. My squad loaded into a dropship with 40 others. Our orders were simple. Land in a rural area, establish a perimeter, wait for reinforcement. A basic operation we'd done dozens of times on other worlds. We weren't expecting any real resistance from ground forces. After all, what could primitives with chemical weapons do against our armor and shields? Reth's mechanical eye dimmed completely for a moment, like he was closing both eyes against a memory. We were about to find out what happens when you give humans time to prepare, and then stupid enough to attack them on their own world. That dropship ride was the last time any of us felt safe, the last time we felt like conquerors instead of prey. He opened his eyes again and looked directly at Mira. You wanted the truth. The truth is, we should have turned around the moment we saw those weaponized asteroids. We should have recognized what we were dealing with. But we were arrogant. We thought we understood warfare, understood intelligence, understood what it meant to be an advanced species. We understood nothing. And that ignorance cost us everything. Mira's fingers ached from gripping her note-taking device too tightly. She forced herself to relax as Reth stared at the wall, his breathing measured and controlled. The rain outside had intensified, matching the dark turn their conversation had taken. The dropship shook like it was being torn apart. Reth began again, his voice distant. Not from enemy fire, just from entering Earth's atmosphere. Their planet has thick air and strong gravity. My squad mate, Doran, joked that the air itself was trying to kill us before we even landed. Nobody laughed. We'd already lost too many ships in orbit. The mood was different now. Tense. The landing zone was supposed to be a clear area in the mountains, far from any major human population centers. The coalition strategy was to establish multiple bases in remote regions, then expand outward once reinforcements arrived. They wanted to avoid civilian casualties if possible. That was standard procedure, something that made the coalition feel civilized and moral. We came down in a valley surrounded by forested slopes, Reth continued. Beautiful, actually. green like I'd never seen before. The air was rich with oxygen, almost intoxicating. Our sensors showed no human settlements within 50 kilometers. The landing was smooth. We deployed in standard formation, set up perimeter sensors, established communications with the fleet. Everything was going according to plan. Mira noticed how Reth emphasized those last words like they were a curse. For the first 6 hours, nothing happened. We dug in, set up shelters, activated defensive shields. Some of the soldiers started to relax. Maybe the humans hadn't detected us. Maybe this part of the operation would be easy after all. Then one of our perimeter sensors went offline. Just one, on the northern edge of our position. The squad leader sent 2 soldiers to investigate. The 2 soldiers never reported back. When they didn't return within 10 minutes, the squad leader sent 4 more. Those 4 found the first 2 soldiers, dead. They'd been killed silently, efficiently, their throats cut with simple metal blades. No energy weapons, no explosions, just sharp steel wielded by someone who knew exactly where to strike. The 4 soldiers called it in, Reth said. They were bringing the bodies back when the attack started. Not the big attack, not an army rushing at us. Just small arms fire from the trees. Bullets. Actual metal bullets fired by chemical propulsion. We'd studied human weapons in our briefings, but seeing them used against us was different. They shouldn't have been effective against our armor, but humans weren't shooting at our armor. They were shooting at our joints, our equipment, our sensors. Precise shots that found every weakness. Reth described how the Coalition soldiers activated their shields and returned fire, their energy weapons cutting through trees and igniting vegetation. They had superior firepower by any measure. But the humans didn't stand and fight. They shot from one position, then disappeared before Coalition forces could target them. Then they'd appear somewhere else and shoot again. Always moving, always adjusting, always surviving. We couldn't see them, Reth said, his mechanical eye whirring with frustration even now, decades later. Our thermal sensors showed heat signatures everywhere because Earth's forests are full of life. Animals, insects, plants generating warmth. The humans knew this. They used it against us. They'd appear as just another heat signature until they were close enough to shoot, then vanish back into the background noise. The fighting continued for hours. Coalition forces held their position, but they couldn't advance, and they couldn't pursue. Every time a squad tried to enter the forest, they'd take casualties and fall back. The humans had turned the terrain itself into a weapon, using their knowledge of the land to make every tree, every rock, every shadow a potential threat. Night fell. Reth continued, and Mira heard his breathing quicken slightly. On Earth, night is truly dark. Their sun is far away, and their planet has no ring system to reflect light. We had night vision equipment. But the humans, they moved through that darkness like they'd been born in it. Because they had been. Humans evolved on a planet where being able to hunt in darkness meant survival. We evolved on a world with 2 close moons that made night almost as bright as day. In darkness, they had every advantage. The night attacks were worse than the day fighting. Humans would creep close to the Coalition perimeter, sometimes within meters, and throw primitive explosives. Grenades, they called them. Simple chemical devices that fragmented into metal shards. If one got past the shields, it could wound multiple soldiers, and the humans were very good at getting them past the shields. Doran died that first night, Reth said quietly. He was standing next to me when a grenade landed between us. I dove left, he dove right. The grenade rolled right toward him. He tried to throw it back, but it detonated in his hands. I can still hear the sound it made. Not the explosion, but the sound of the shrapnel hitting his body, like rain on metal, but wetter. Mira wanted to stop the recording, to give Reth a moment, but he continued without pause. By morning, we'd lost 18 soldiers. Not from overwhelming force, but from constant pressure. The humans never gave us rest. They never attacked in large groups where our weapons would be most effective. They just kept coming, 1 or 2, at a time, forcing us to stay alert, to waste ammunition, to make mistakes when we were exhausted. The Coalition commander finally called for evacuation. The landing zone was supposed to be secure within a day, but after 14 hours, they'd barely held on to their initial position. Drop ships came down to extract the survivors, and that's when the humans revealed they'd been planning for this too. As the first dropship descended, Reth explained, something hit it from the mountainside. A missile, but not high-tech. Old technology. A shoulder-fired weapon that any human soldier could carry. The dropship's shields deflected it, but barely. Then another missile hit, and another. The humans had positioned soldiers in the mountains with these simple weapons, waiting for us to call for extraction. The dropship had to abort its landing and climb back to orbit while taking fire the entire way. It took 3 more dropships, all under constant attack, to evacuate the coalition forces. Of the 200 soldiers who had landed, 137 made it back to orbit. 63 dead in less than 24 hours, killed by a species the coalition had labeled primitive. On the dropship back to the fleet, Reth said, nobody spoke. We were all thinking the same thing. If one landing zone had been that costly and there were 40 other landing zones experiencing similar resistance, how many soldiers had we lost? How was this possible? These were humans with chemical weapons and simple tactics, and they'd beaten us. The fleet admiral refused to accept the reports at first. He accused the ground commanders of incompetence, of cowardice. He ordered another wave of landings, larger this time, with armored vehicles and air support. Reth's squad was given 3 days to rest, then they were sent down again. This time to a coastal region where human population was denser. We thought the vehicles would make a difference, Reth said. Armored transports that could move through any terrain, with weapons that could level buildings. We'd bring overwhelming force and crush any resistance before it could adapt. That was the plan. But again, we didn't understand humans. We didn't understand that they'd been fighting each other for thousands of years. Every tactic we tried, they'd seen before. Every weapon we used, they'd already figured out how to counter. The second landing was worse than the first. Humans had prepared the coastal area with traps that their sensors couldn't detect. Pits covered with vegetation that collapsed under the weight of armored vehicles. Explosives buried in roads that detonated when pressure was applied. Simple wire stretched between trees at neck height that decapitated soldiers riding on open vehicles. Ancient tactics that shouldn't have worked against a spacefaring military. But they did. We lost 3 vehicles in the first hour. Reth remembered. Just gone. Fallen into pits or blown apart by buried explosives. The soldiers inside either died instantly or were trapped in the wreckage. And that's when we learned another terrible thing about humans. They don't take prisoners unless it serves a purpose. The soldiers trapped in those vehicles, the ones who were wounded and helpless, they were shot as soon as humans reached them. Not out of cruelty, but efficiency. Humans couldn't guard prisoners while fighting us, so they just eliminated threats. Mira felt cold despite the warm room. That's against every convention of warfare. Humans didn't sign our conventions, Reth replied. And we'd invaded their world. From their perspective, they were defending their home against aliens who'd come to conquer them. Every rule of civilized warfare went out the window the moment we entered their atmosphere. We wanted a quick, clean occupation. They wanted us dead or gone. One side was fighting by rules, the other was fighting to survive. Guess which side had the advantage? The coastal operation lasted 5 days before coalition forces withdrew again. The casualties were even higher this time. Reth's squad, which had started with 12 members, was down to 6, and those 6 had all been wounded at least once. Reth himself had taken a bullet to his shoulder that punched through his armor at the joint, exactly where the protection was weakest. A human medic treated me, Reth said, touching his shoulder unconsciously. After we surrendered and were waiting for extraction, this human woman approached with her hands up. She had medical supplies. Our translator device let us communicate. She said she'd treat our wounded if we let her. Our commander was suspicious, thought it might be a trick. But we had soldiers dying and our medical supplies were running low. He agreed. The human medic worked quickly and competently, using techniques that were different from coalition medicine but effective. She saved 3 soldiers who would have died otherwise. She didn't speak much, just did her job with professional detachment. When she finished, she gathered her supplies and walked away without asking for anything in return. That confused us more than the fighting, Reth admitted. Why show mercy? Why help the enemy? Our commander thought maybe humans were preparing to offer surrender terms. Maybe they'd realized they couldn't win and wanted to show goodwill. We were so stupid. We still didn't understand. Reth leaned forward. his mechanical eye focusing intently on Mira. That medic wasn't showing mercy. She was showing us what we were up against. She was proving that humans could be better than us even while defeating us. She was saying that they didn't need to be cruel to win, that they were in control of this war, and she was right. We were the ones who were desperate, who were confused, who didn't know what to do next. They knew exactly what they were doing. By the end of the second week, Coalition forces had abandoned all surface positions on Earth. Every landing had failed. Thousands of soldiers were dead or wounded. The fleet remained in orbit, bombarding military targets from space, but even that was becoming dangerous. Humans had started launching their own spacecraft, crude but effective, carrying explosives that targeted Coalition ships. It was clear that humans wouldn't surrender, couldn't be intimidated, and were willing to fight until either they won or everyone died. That's when the Coalition leadership made the decision, Reth said. If we couldn't conquer Earth quickly, we'd go around it. Attack their off-world colonies, cut off their supply lines, isolate them, make Earth surrender by destroying everything beyond it. It seemed like a good plan. We'd never met a species that would keep fighting when their colonies were threatened. We were about to learn that humans aren't like any species we'd ever met. Outside, the rain had stopped. Gray light filtered through the clouds as afternoon settled over Dranis. Mira stretched her legs and offered Reth water, which he accepted with a nod. His hands were steadier now, as if talking about the horror was somehow easier than holding it inside. They sent us to a captured human installation, Reth said after drinking. We'd finally secured one, a military research facility in what humans called Nevada. Desert terrain, isolated, lightly defended. We took it with minimal casualties and thought we'd finally achieved something. The Coalition Command wanted to study human technology, understand their weapons, maybe find weaknesses we could exploit. My squad was assigned to security detail. The facility was underground, built into a mountain. Typical human paranoia, Reth explained. They built important installations where they couldn't be easily bombed from orbit. The Coalition controlled the surface and the first 3 levels below. Engineers and scientists moved in to catalog everything, to strip the facility of useful intelligence. We stayed there for 47 days, Reth continued. 47 days that felt like 400. Because the facility wasn't empty. We thought it was. Our sensors showed it was, but humans were still there. In the walls and the ventilation systems, in tunnels our scanners couldn't detect, living there like parasites watching us, waiting. The first sign something was wrong came on day 12. A Coalition scientist disappeared from a laboratory on the 2nd level. His colleagues found his work terminal still active, his tools laid out, but he was gone. Security searched for 6 hours before finding his body in a ventilation shaft, killed with a blade to the base of his skull. Quick, silent professional. We sealed the ventilation systems after that, Reth said. Welded the access panel shut, posted guards at every entrance. But the attacks continued. Another soldier disappeared from a bathroom. A technician was found dead in a supply closet. Each time, no sound, no struggle, just bodies appearing where they shouldn't be. The humans were inside our perimeter, inside what we thought was secure, killing us one at a time. Mira felt her skin crawl. How many were there? We never knew for certain, Reth replied. We'd find evidence of 3 or 4 individuals, but it might have been more. They had access to the entire facility's blueprint. They knew every passage, every hidden space, every way to move unseen. We were guests in their house, and they were reminding us of it. The Coalition commander ordered a complete sweep of the facility, level by level, room by room. Soldiers worked in groups, checking every space large enough to hide a person. They found evidence of human occupation, food supplies, sleeping areas, waste disposal. But they never found the humans themselves. It was like chasing ghosts. On day 23, Reth said, his voice dropping lower, they hit us all at once, middle of the night. Shift change when we were most vulnerable. Explosions on 3 different levels, timed perfectly to cause maximum confusion. In the chaos, humans struck. Not just 1 or 2 anymore, but dozens. They'd been hiding in spaces we hadn't found, waiting for the right moment. The attack was coordinated chaos. Humans wearing captured Coalition uniforms moved through the facility, shooting officers and destroying equipment. They knew exactly which targets mattered: communications, life support, weapons storage. Within 20 minutes, the Coalition forces in the facility lost all contact with the surface and most of their heavy weapons. I was on the 3rd level when it started, Reth remembered. Heard the explosions above and below, then the alarms. My squad moved to reinforce the command center, but we ran into humans in the corridors. They'd blocked the main passages with debris and were firing from covered positions. We had better armor and shields, but they had position and preparation. We were fighting blind. The battle inside the facility lasted 8 hours, hand-to-hand in some places, room-to-room in others. Coalition soldiers had superior equipment, but humans had desperation and intimate knowledge of the terrain. They'd sabotaged the lights, so most of the fighting happened in darkness or emergency lighting. They'd vented atmosphere from certain sections, forcing Coalition troops to fight in environmental suits. Every advantage the Coalition had was neutralized by human creativity. We finally pushed them back, Reth said. Not defeated them, just made them retreat deeper into the facility. By sunrise, we controlled the upper 3 levels again, but we'd lost 90 soldiers, 90 out of 300, and we still didn't know how many humans we were fighting. Prisoners we captured wouldn't talk. They'd just stare at us with this cold determination that made your blood freeze. The Coalition commander wanted to collapse the entire facility, bury it, and everyone inside, but his superiors refused. They'd invested too many resources taking the installation, and the intelligence it contained was too valuable. Instead, they sent reinforcements. Reth's squad was pulled out and replaced with fresh troops. I was glad to leave, Reth admitted. That place was a nightmare. But I felt sorry for the soldiers replacing us. They had no idea what they were walking into. Last I heard, before everything went completely wrong, humans retook the facility 6 weeks later, killed everyone inside and rigged the whole place to explode. When Coalition forces tried to recapture it, the humans detonated charges that brought down the entire mountain, buried all that technology and all those bodies under 1 million tons of rock. Mira had read reports about this in the archives, sanitized versions that called it a tactical withdrawal. The histories say you discovered important intelligence before the facility was lost. We discovered how much trouble we were in, Reth corrected. The files we recovered showed that humans had been preparing for contact with alien life for over a century. They had contingency plans for everything: invasion, infiltration, negotiation, trade. They'd wargamed scenarios against species they'd never met, using pure imagination. And when we actually showed up, they adapted those plans in days. We were fighting against a species that had literally practiced fighting us before we existed to them. After the facility disaster, Reth's squad was reassigned to perimeter security on a Coalition ship in orbit. The ground war on Earth had become a meat grinder, consuming soldiers faster than the Coalition could replace them. The strategy shifted to blockade. Keep humans trapped on their planet while attacking their off-world assets. That's when things got really bad, Reth said. We thought keeping humans confined to Earth would work. We'd already started operations against their colonies on other planets and moons. Easy targets, we thought. But humans don't protect things the way we do. When we defend something, we put barriers around it, shields and weapons and soldiers. Humans defend by making the cost of attacking too high. The Coalition fleet moved to blockade Earth, surrounding the planet with ships that would intercept any vessel trying to leave. It seemed effective at first. Human ships that attempted to break through were destroyed or turned back. Supply lines between Earth and its colonies were cut. The Coalition leadership was pleased, thinking they'd finally contained the threat. Then the attack started, Reth continued. Not from ships, but from debris. Humans started launching thousands of small objects from Earth's surface. Metal fragments, rocks with simple rocket engines, even garbage. Each piece too small to worry about individually, but together they created a field of obstacles. Our ships had to constantly maneuver to avoid collisions which burned fuel and wore down our crews. Worse, some of those objects weren't debris. Some were bombs disguised to look like junk until they got close to Coalition ships. Then they'd activate, either ramming into vessels or exploding nearby. The damage from each attack was minor, but death by 1,000 cuts was still death. Ships needed constant repairs. Crews were exhausted from alert status, and the blockade began to weaken. A human probe got through, Reth said. Just a small automated vessel barely bigger than a coffin. It slipped past our blockade by pretending to be debris, then activated its engine once it was clear and jumped to faster than light speed. We didn't think much of it at the time. What could one probe do? The probe was a message, Reth explained. It reached the nearest human colony and transmitted everything that had happened since the war started. Detailed information about Coalition forces' tactics, weaknesses, and it carried something else. Instructions for the colonies to begin their own attacks. We thought the colonies would surrender or negotiate, Reth said. Most of them were small, poorly defended, reliant on Earth for supplies. Cut off from home, facing coalition military superiority, the logical choice was submission. But humans don't always choose the logical option. They choose the stubborn option. The survival option. Human colonies didn't surrender. Instead, they went dark, stopped all communications, shut down their transponders, and disappeared into the void of space. Coalition forces searching for them found empty stations and abandoned settlements. It looked like evacuation, like the colonists had fled deeper into unexplored space. That wasn't what happened, Reth said. The colonists hadn't fled. They'd just stopped being colonists and become something else. Guerrillas, pirates, hunters. They hid their ships in asteroid fields and gas clouds, places where sensors didn't work well. Then they started hitting our supply convoys. Never the big military fleets, just the transports and support vessels. The soft targets. Coalition logistics began to break down. Ships ran low on fuel, on ammunition, on food. The supply lines stretched back hundreds of light years, and humans were cutting them one transport at a time. Convoys needed military escorts, which pulled ships from the Earth blockade, which weakened the containment, which let more human vessels escape. It was like trying to hold water in your fists, Reth said. The tighter we squeezed, the more it slipped through. Every tactical victory felt hollow because strategically we were losing, and the casualties kept mounting, not from big battles but from constant attrition. A transport destroyed here, a patrol ship ambushed there, soldiers killed in facilities we thought were secure. Mira checked her recording equipment, making sure everything was still capturing properly. When did you realize the coalition couldn't win? Reth was quiet for a long moment. There wasn't one moment. It was gradual, like watching ice melt. First you notice the war isn't going as planned. Then you notice nothing is going as planned. Then you notice your friends are dead and replacement soldiers look younger and more scared. Then you notice the officers are lying about victory being close. Then you stop believing anything they say. He stood and walked to the window again, though there was nothing to see except gray sky. I was still on the ship when the command came through. New orders? We were pulling back from Earth orbit and regrouping at a coalition stronghold. Not a retreat officially, a strategic repositioning. But everyone knew what it meant. We couldn't hold the blockade anymore. Humans had broken us. The fleet withdrawal was supposed to be orderly, but it turned into chaos. Human ships that had been hiding in the outer system suddenly appeared, harassing the coalition fleet as it tried to organize. More debris fields, more disguised bombs, more small attacks that added up to major damage. Ships were lost during the retreat, including the vessel carrying most of the senior officers. I transferred to a destroyer, Reth said. We were part of the rear guard supposed to cover the withdrawal. That's when I saw Earth for the last time from orbit. Beautiful planet even after everything. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so lovely had hurt us so badly. How a species we'd dismissed as primitive had taught us fear. The silence in the archive room had weight to it. Mira found herself holding her breath as Reth settled back into his chair, his mechanical eye dimming and brightening as if adjusting to internal visions only he could see. Mars, Reth said suddenly. That's where the coalition decided to make its stand. If we couldn't take Earth, we'd destroy humanity's greatest achievement beyond it. Mars was their first successful colony world, home to millions of humans, the center of their off-world civilization. The Council thought taking Mars would break human morale, force them to negotiate. We were wrong about that too. The coalition assembled the largest invasion fleet in its history, 700 ships carrying ground forces, orbital bombardment platforms, occupation specialists. The fleet gathered at a staging point 3 systems away from Mars, preparing for overwhelming assault. This time the coalition promised there would be no mistakes. This time they'd use sufficient force. I was on the destroyer Brightwing, Reth continued. We'd been pulled back from Earth with the rest of the blockade fleet and folded into the Mars operation. My squad was down to 4 soldiers now. Everyone else was either dead or too wounded to fight. Command kept promising reinforcements, but they never came. The coalition was running out of soldiers willing to fight humans. The fleet jumped to Mars expecting resistance, but confident in their numbers. What they found was a planet that appeared almost undefended. A few orbital stations, some patrol craft, nothing that could stand against 700 warships. The coalition admiral was suspicious, remembering the traps at Earth, but scans showed nothing unusual. Mars looked vulnerable. We should have known better, Reth said bitterly. If Earth had taught us anything, it should have been that humans don't do obvious. They don't fight the way you expect. They don't defend the way others defend. But we were desperate for a victory. Any victory, so we ignored our instincts and moved in. The fleet was halfway to Mars when the sensors started picking up anomalies. Objects throughout the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter were moving, changing orbits, accelerating. The tactical officers reported hundreds of asteroids converging on the fleet's position. Initial estimates suggested they were natural phenomena, gravitational perturbations, nothing threatening. Then the first one hit, Reth said, and Mira heard him swallow hard. Not hit exactly, passed through the formation at incredible speed. It missed the ships by a few hundred meters, but the point wasn't to hit us. The point was to show us what they'd done. Humans had attached engines to asteroids, simple rocket motors salvaged from old spacecraft, powered by solar collectors controlled by basic automation. Technology the Coalition had dismissed as primitive. But when you accelerated a rock the size of a building to a fraction of light speed, primitive technology became a planet killer. The asteroids were moving too fast for our weapons to intercept, Reth explained. By the time we detected them, they were already past us or about to impact. Our shields could deflect energy weapons and small projectiles, but against that much kinetic force they were useless. The ships that got hit just came apart. No explosion, no fire, just sudden catastrophic structural failure. The Brightwing survived the first wave by pure luck, positioned in a gap between asteroid trajectories. Around them, dozens of other ships weren't so fortunate. The fleet formation scattered as captains tried to maneuver away from the incoming projectiles, but that just made them easier targets. The asteroids had been aimed at the fleet's projected position, calculated months in advance. Every evasive maneuver took ships into another kill zone. We lost 200 ships in the first hour, Reth said quietly. 200 ships destroyed by rocks with engines. The Admiral tried to order a withdrawal, but the asteroids kept coming. Humans had prepared hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all converging on the space around Mars. The fleet couldn't retreat without flying through more kill zones, and staying in place meant waiting to die. Some ships tried to shoot down the asteroids before they reached attack speed, but that required getting close to the belt, which meant exposing themselves to more projectiles. It was a perfect trap, elegant in its simplicity. Humans had used basic physics and planning to create a defensive field that conventional military forces couldn't overcome. The Brightwing got hit on the second day, Reth continued. Not a direct hit, thankfully. An asteroid grazed our stern, tore off the engine section and half the crew quarters. The impact threw everyone forward. I remember flying through the corridor, hitting a wall, then everything went dark. Reth woke up in the medical bay with a concussion, broken ribs, and a fractured arm. The ship was crippled, life support failing, floating dead in space. Around them, the battle continued, or what passed for a battle when one side was just trying to survive. The Coalition fleet had been reduced to fewer than 400 functional vessels, and they were still taking casualties. That's when the human ships appeared, Reth said. Small craft, nothing impressive by military standards. But they didn't need to be impressive. They just needed to finish off the crippled Coalition vessels, the ships that couldn't maneuver, couldn't fight back, couldn't run, ships like mine. The Brightwing's captain ordered everyone to evacuation pods. There weren't enough for everyone, so the wounded went first. Reth's broken ribs and arm qualified him for evacuation, though he tried to argue. His squad mates pushed him into a pod, sealed the door, and launched him toward the nearest Coalition vessel before he could protest. I never saw them again, Reth said, his voice thick. The Brightwing was destroyed 6 minutes after my pod launched. Human boarding parties got on board and set charges in the reactor. The whole ship just vanished in a flash of light. 412 crew members gone in an instant, including the 3 soldiers who'd been with me since the start. The evacuation pods were picked up by a Coalition cruiser that had survived mostly intact. The ship was overcrowded with survivors, low on supplies and trying to navigate out of the asteroid field while avoiding human hunters. It took 4 days to reach safe space. 4 days of constant anxiety as every sensor contact might be a human attack. When we finally escaped, Reth said, I learned the full scale of the disaster. Of the 700 ships that had attacked Mars, fewer than 200 made it out. Thousands of soldiers dead, hundreds of billions in military hardware destroyed, and we hadn't even reached Mars orbit. The Coalition's mighty invasion fleet had been shattered by simple projectiles and planning. Mira struggled to comprehend the numbers. How did the coalition leadership respond? Denial at first, Reth replied. They claimed the reports were exaggerated, that the fleet had achieved its objectives and was regrouping. But you can't hide that kind of loss. Families asking about soldiers who weren't coming home. Supply chains disrupted because transport ships were destroyed. Worlds left undefended because the ships protecting them had been sent to die at Mars. The truth eventually came out through unofficial channels. Soldiers who survived told their stories. Officers who'd been there contradicted the official narrative. The coalition government tried to suppress the information, but it spread anyway. And with the truth came the questions. How had a primitive species defeated the galaxy's most powerful military? Why were we still fighting? What was the plan for victory? There was no plan, Reth said. That's what nobody wanted to admit. The coalition had never lost a war before. We had protocols for occupation, for integration, for managing defeated species, but we had no protocol for being defeated ourselves. So the leadership just kept ordering attacks, kept sending soldiers to die, kept pretending that victory was possible if we just tried harder. Reth was transferred to a garrison on a coalition core world to recover from his injuries. While his ribs healed and his arm was rebuilt, he watched news reports about the war. Every broadcast claimed progress, claimed that human resistance was weakening, claimed that peace was near. Every broadcast was a lie. The other wounded soldiers talked, Reth said. In the medical facilities, in the recovery barracks, we shared stories. Everyone had seen something terrible. Everyone had lost friends. And everyone knew we were losing. The only ones who didn't know were the civilians, and they were starting to figure it out when their sons and daughters didn't come home. After 3 months of recovery, Reth was declared fit for duty and given new orders. He was being sent to defend Dranis, his homeworld, as part of a rapid response force. The assignment confused him. Dranis was deep in coalition territory, thousands of light years from Earth. Why would it need defending? That's when I understood how bad things had gotten, Reth explained. The war had changed. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. Humans had gone on the offensive. Human ships had been spotted in coalition space far from their territory. Not invasion fleets, but small groups conducting hit-and-run attacks. They'd strike supply depots, destroy communications relays, and disappear before coalition forces could respond. It was guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale, and the coalition had no defense against it. The humans weren't trying to conquer, Reth said. They were sending a message. They were saying that if the coalition wouldn't leave them alone, nowhere in coalition space would be safe. They were showing us what it felt like to be attacked in your home, to fear for your world, to understand that you were vulnerable. Reth arrived on Dranis to find his homeworld in a state of paranoid alert. Defense satellites in orbit, military checkpoints on the ground, soldiers patrolling areas that had been peaceful his entire life. The civilian population was scared, demanding to know why the government couldn't protect them from a species they'd been told was primitive and defeated. I was assigned to a rapid response unit, Reth continued. Our job was to respond to any human incursion within our sector. For 6 weeks, nothing happened. No attacks, no sightings, no evidence that humans were even in our region of space. Command thought maybe the threat had been exaggerated, that humans were focusing their raids elsewhere. Then the signals started appearing. Coalition tracking stations detected human vessels at the edge of the system, then lost them. Sensors would pick up drive signatures that matched human ships. But when investigation teams arrived, they'd find nothing. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. The entire defense force was on constant alert, exhausted and jumping at shadows. On day 43, Reth said, his mechanical eye brightening, we got a real contact. A human ship, small and fast, detected near one of our communication satellites. My unit scrambled to intercept. We reached the satellite in 18 minutes, ready for a fight. But the human ship was gone, and the satellite was intact. They searched the area for hours, finding no trace of human presence. The satellite showed no damage, no tampering, nothing that suggested it had been attacked. Command ordered them back to base, marking it as a false alarm or sensor glitch. But Reth knew better. He'd fought humans long enough to recognize their tactics. They weren't there to destroy the satellite, Reth explained. They were there to show us they could have destroyed it if they wanted. They were demonstrating that they knew where our infrastructure was, that they could reach it any time, that we couldn't stop them. It was a threat more effective than any actual attack. The psychological pressure continued for months. Human ships would appear and vanish. Coalition installations would be approached but not attacked. Defense forces chased ghosts across multiple systems, burning resources and morale without ever catching the enemy. The fear was worse than actual combat because it never ended. Then one day, Reth said, everything stopped. No more sightings, no more sensor contacts. For a week, there was nothing. Command thought maybe the humans had given up or been recalled to defend their own territory. We thought the crisis was over. Reth's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We were wrong. The silence was just preparation for what came next. Afternoon had faded into evening. Mira activated the room's lighting as shadows grew longer. Reth sat motionless, his face a mask of controlled memory. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. The broadcast came through every coalition channel simultaneously. Reth began. Military frequencies, civilian networks, emergency services, everything. Someone somehow had accessed our entire communications infrastructure. The message was simple. Just a list of names, addresses, and family details. Officers, soldiers, politicians. Everyone involved in the war against humanity. And their families. Where they lived, where their children went to school, where their parents were retired. Mira felt ice in her stomach. They were threatening families? No, Reth corrected. That's what made it so terrifying. The message included all this personal information. But then it said that humans had decided not to target non-combatants, that they'd gathered the intelligence and had the capability, but they were choosing restraint. It was worse than a direct threat. It was showing mercy while demonstrating power. The coalition government panicked. If humans could access secure communication networks, what else could they access? Defense systems, navigation computers, life support on stations? The trust in their own technology evaporated overnight. Every system had to be checked for human infiltration. Every network had to be secured. Every protocol had to be rewritten. The chaos that followed was worse than any military defeat, Reth explained. Government officials relocated their families to secure facilities. Military officers refused to report for duty until their loved ones were protected. Entire fleets were grounded while their systems were inspected for tampering. Humans hadn't fired a shot, but they'd paralyzed us. Reth's unit on Dranis went on lockdown. All communications through standard channels were suspended. Orders came through hand-delivered messages and encrypted one-time codes. The military was operating like primitive tribes, reduced to basic security because they couldn't trust their own technology. For 2 weeks, nothing else happened, Reth continued. Just that one broadcast and its implications. Command thought maybe that was the whole attack. Psychological warfare to make us paranoid and inefficient. But then the real operation began. Human ships appeared in coalition territory, not on the edges but deep inside, near populated worlds. They didn't attack, just broadcast their presence, let themselves be detected. Defense forces scrambled to intercept. But the human ships always escaped before engagement. It happened across dozens of systems, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes in sequence. The pattern made no tactical sense until someone realized what humans were actually doing. They were mapping our response times, Reth said. Recording how long it took us to scramble forces, which routes we took, how we communicated during crisis. They were studying us the same way a scientist studies insects. Every defensive measure we took gave them more information. Every protocol we followed revealed our patterns. The coalition leadership finally understood the depth of their mistake. Humans weren't fighting a war of conquest. They were fighting a war of demonstration. Every action was designed to prove that the coalition had no advantage, no safety, no superiority. That humans could reach anywhere, strike anything, and the coalition couldn't stop them. On day 16 after the broadcast, Reth said, his hands beginning to shake again, we got orders to investigate an incident at a civilian infrastructure site. Not a military target, just a power distribution center that supplied electricity to a major city on Dranis. Someone had broken in, bypassed security, and left something behind. Reth's unit arrived to find local security forces standing outside the facility, refusing to enter. The security chief explained that they'd found an object in the central control room. It wasn't a bomb. Their scanners confirmed that. It was a data storage device with a note attached. The note said the device contained detailed plans of how to cripple Dranis's entire power grid, water system, and atmospheric processors. It said humans had uploaded these plans to their networks but wouldn't use them unless forced to. It said this was a final warning. We had to call in intelligence specialists to verify the device wasn't trapped, Reth recalled. When they finally accessed it, they found exactly what the note promised. Complete schematics, vulnerability assessments, step-by-step instructions for destroying our world's infrastructure. It was professional, thorough, and terrifying, not because of what it threatened, but because of what it revealed. The plans showed that humans had been gathering intelligence on coalition worlds for months, maybe years. They'd infiltrated secure databases, studied critical systems, identified weaknesses in everything from planetary shields to food distribution networks. They could destroy any coalition world without firing a shot, just by sabotaging the right systems in the right sequence. But they didn't do it, Reth emphasized. That was the message. We could destroy you, but we're choosing not to. We're giving you a chance to end this. Every coalition world received similar demonstrations. Different methods, different targets, but always the same message. Stop the war, or we'll show you what real warfare looks like. The psychological impact was devastating. Coalition citizens who'd supported the war started demanding peace. Soldiers deserted rather than continue fighting. Entire planets threatened to secede from the coalition if the war didn't end. The government that had started the conflict was collapsing under the weight of fear and distrust. I was in a command briefing when the decision came down, Reth said. The Coalition Council had voted to pursue peace negotiations. Not surrender officially, but everyone knew what it meant. We'd lost. Lost to a species we'd invaded with confidence. Lost despite superior numbers and technology. Lost because we'd never understood what we were fighting. The peace talks were scheduled to take place on neutral ground, a coalition station far from any major system. Reth's unit was assigned to security detail, ensuring the human delegation's safety. He remembered feeling strange about that, protecting humans after fighting them for so long. But orders were orders, and part of him was curious to see them up close in a non-combat situation. They arrived in a small ship, Reth recalled. Nothing impressive, just a transport modified for long-range travel. The delegation was 6 people. 3 diplomats, 2 security personnel, and 1 military advisor. They looked normal. That was the strangest part. After everything we'd experienced, after all the nightmares, they just looked like regular people. The lead negotiator was a human woman named Helen. She was older, gray-haired, wearing simple formal clothing. She smiled politely at the coalition representatives, shook hands with those willing, and sat down to discuss terms. There was no arrogance in her manner, no triumph, no cruelty. She spoke like someone settling a business dispute, not ending a war. The negotiations lasted 3 days, Reth said. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the details afterward. The coalition offered reparations, technology sharing, territory, trying to buy peace the way they'd bought other species. Helen refused everything. She said humans wanted only one thing, to be left alone. The final treaty was simple. The coalition would withdraw all forces from human space and recognize humanity's sovereignty. Humans would cease all military operations against coalition territory. There would be no reparations in either direction, no exchange of prisoners because humans had released theirs already, no ongoing obligations. Just separation and mutual non-aggression. The Coalition Council tried to negotiate more favorable terms, Reth explained. They wanted guarantees that humans wouldn't attack in the future, wanted limitations on human military development, wanted some measure of control. Helen just looked at them and said no. She said the coalition had lost the right to make demands, that humans would agree to peace but not subjugation. What shocked Reth most was what happened after the treaty was signed. The human delegation shared information about coalition prisoners of war that humans held. Location, condition, and treatment. They'd kept detailed records, followed medical protocols, ensured prisoners were treated humanely despite having no obligation to do so. Humans had been fighting a savage war while maintaining moral standards the coalition had abandoned. They released our prisoners over the next month, Reth said. Every single one, healthy and alive. They even repaired some of the injuries they'd caused, provided medical treatment we couldn't have given. I spoke to one of the released prisoners, a pilot who'd been shot down over Earth. She said the humans who captured her were professional, even kind. They gave her medical attention, decent food, and eventually released her on a neutral station with enough supplies to get home. This confused coalition military analysts more than anything else. How could a species fight so ruthlessly and show such mercy? How could they be capable of such violence and such compassion? The answer, Reth learned, was that humans saw war and morality as separate things. They'd fight as brutally as needed to win, but they'd never lose their sense of right and wrong. I was part of the withdrawal from human space, Reth continued. We had 60 days to remove all coalition presence from systems humans claimed. It was humiliating, retreating from worlds we'd occupied, abandoning bases we'd built, but also a relief. Every day farther from Earth was a day closer to safety. On the last day of withdrawal, Reth's ship passed through the outer edge of human territory. They detected a human vessel on patrol, monitoring the coalition's departure. The two ships maintained distance, neither approaching or threatening. As Reth's ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, he saw the human patrol ship turn back toward Earth, its mission complete. That was my last sight of human space, Reth said. A single small ship guarding their borders, making sure we left. It seemed inadequate somehow. After everything, after the horror and the fear and the deaths, it came down to one ship watching us go. But that was enough. Because we weren't coming back. The aftermath of the war changed the coalition forever. The government that had started the conflict fell apart within a year, replaced by new leadership that promised peaceful coexistence with all species. Military spending was cut dramatically as the coalition realized that force alone couldn't solve everything. The entire culture shifted from expansion and control to cooperation and respect. But the memories remained, Reth said quietly. For those of us who fought, who saw what humans were capable of, the memories never faded. I still see them sometimes in dreams. Human soldiers moving through shadows, human ships appearing from nowhere, human voices on communication channels warning us to leave their space. Reth looked directly at Mira, his mechanical eye focusing with unnatural intensity. That's why I agreed to this interview. Because there are politicians now, young ones who don't remember the war, who think maybe humans were just lucky, who think maybe we could succeed if we tried again with better planning. They don't understand. They weren't there. Mira felt the weight of his gaze, the urgency in his words. What do you want people to understand? That humans are different, Reth said simply. Every species in the galaxy has a breaking point. A level of casualties where they surrender, a degree of hardship where they give up. A point where survival becomes more important than victory. Humans don't have that point. Or if they do, it's somewhere beyond where any rational species would ever go. They'll fight until they win or until everyone is dead. And they'll never stop adapting, never stop trying new approaches, never stop being creative with how they hurt you. He leaned back, suddenly looking very old and very tired. But that's not the scariest part. The scariest part is that they can turn it off. They can go from total war to total peace in an instant. They can show mercy to enemies who showed them none. They can be the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and also the most civilized. That duality, that ability to choose between violence and peace, that's what makes them truly terrifying. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of recording equipment. Outside, darkness had fallen completely over Dranis, the city lights creating artificial constellations against the night sky. Reth stood slowly, indicating the interview was over for now. Tomorrow, he promised, he'd tell Mira about the final lessons learned, about what the war had taught the coalition about itself. But for now, he needed to rest. Morning light streamed through the archive windows as Mira set up her equipment for what would be the final session. Reth arrived earlier than expected, moving with purpose despite his age and injuries. He settled into his chair and waited for Mira to indicate she was ready. There was something different about him today, a sense of urgency that hadn't been present before. I need to tell you the rest quickly, Reth said before Mira could ask her first question. There's a council meeting this afternoon. They're voting on increased military funding, preparing for what they call future security needs. I need to finish this before that vote happens. People need to understand what they're risking. Mira adjusted the recording levels and nodded. Tell me about the aftermath. What happened after the war ended? The coalition changed everything, Reth began. Military doctrine, diplomatic protocols, even how we thought about other species. The entire foundation of our civilization was built on the idea that we were the most advanced, the most capable, the natural leaders of the galaxy. Humans shattered that assumption completely. We had to rebuild our entire identity. The first changes were practical. The Coalition Military Academy rewrote its textbooks, incorporating lessons from the human wars. Students studied human tactics, human psychology, human methods of warfare, not to fight humans again, but to understand that military superiority wasn't just about technology. It was about adaptation, creativity, and the will to persist against impossible odds. I became an instructor at the academy, Reth explained. They wanted someone who'd actually fought humans to teach the new generation. I spent 20 years teaching young soldiers about the war, trying to make them understand what I'm telling you now. Some listened. Others thought I was exaggerating, that I'd been traumatized and was making humans seem worse than they were. The younger generation of coalition citizens had no direct memory of the war. They'd grown up in peacetime, hearing sanitized stories that downplayed the coalition's defeats and made the conflict seem less catastrophic than it was. The official histories called it a misunderstanding, a conflict that ended in negotiated peace. They didn't mention the terror, the casualties, the complete breakdown of coalition confidence. That's why this matters, Reth said, gesturing at the recording equipment. The people who remember are dying. In another 20 years, everyone who fought in the human wars will be gone. The only record will be official histories written by politicians who want to make the coalition look better. Future generations won't know how badly we lost or why. Mira asked about contact between humans and the coalition after the war. Had there been trade, diplomacy, any kind of relationship? Reth nodded slowly, explaining that humans had maintained their isolation for the first decade. They'd focused on rebuilding, on expanding their colonies, on internal development. The coalition respected their borders, too afraid to risk another conflict. Then about 15 years after the war ended, humans sent ambassadors, Reth continued. Not to join the coalition, but to establish formal diplomatic relations. They wanted embassies on major worlds, trade agreements, cultural exchanges. The Coalition Council was suspicious at first, wondering if it was some kind of trick. But the humans were genuine. They wanted peaceful coexistence. The arrival of human ambassadors was strange for Reth and others who'd fought in the war. These were representatives of the species that had defeated them, walking through coalition cities, attending social functions, acting like nothing terrible had happened. Some veterans couldn't handle it. They saw human faces and remembered combat, remembered friends dying, remembered fear. I met one of the ambassadors, Reth said. His name was David. He was young, probably born after the war started. He knew I was a veteran and asked if we could talk privately. I agreed, curious what he wanted to say. He thanked me. Mira looked confused. Thanked you? For what? For fighting honorably, he said. For treating human prisoners decently when I had the chance. For being one of the officers who followed rules of war even when we were losing. He said humanity respected soldiers like me, who did their duty but maintained their principles. It was the strangest conversation I'd ever had, being thanked by the enemy for losing to them with dignity. David explained to Reth that humans understood why the coalition had invaded. They didn't hate the coalition or its people. They'd simply refused to accept subjugation and had fought for their freedom. Now that the war was over, humans wanted to move forward. They believed in learning from the past without being trapped by it. That conversation changed something in me, Reth admitted. I'd spent years angry at humans for what the war had cost me. Friends dead, body broken, nightmares that never ended. But talking to David, I realized humans had paid their own price. They'd lost people too. They'd suffered too. The difference was they'd chosen to let go of the anger. Over the following decades, human-coalition relations slowly normalized. Trade routes opened, allowing exchange of goods and technology. Human scientists visited coalition universities, sharing knowledge. Some humans even chose to live on coalition worlds, integrating into local communities. The species that had once been enemies became neighbors, colleagues, sometimes friends. But there was always distance, Reth said. Humans participated in galactic society but never joined it completely. They maintained their independence, their own government, their own military. They were part of the community but also separate from it, and everyone understood why. They'd fought too hard for their freedom to risk losing it to bureaucratic integration. Mira asked the question that had been building throughout the interview. Did you ever regret fighting them? Reth was quiet for a long moment. I regret that the war happened at all. I regret the arrogance that made the coalition think we could force humanity into submission. I regret every friend I lost, Every soldier who died following orders to invade a world that wanted nothing from us except to be left alone. But do I regret fighting once the war started? No, I was a soldier. I did my duty. The regret belongs to the leaders who started the war, not the soldiers who fought it. The old soldier stood and walked to the window, looking out at the academy grounds where young coalition officers trained. Those students down there, they don't understand how lucky they are. They live in a galaxy where the coalition respects boundaries, where we negotiate before resorting to force, where we recognize that other species have the right to refuse our way of life. We learned those lessons from humans, paid for them with blood and humiliation. Reth turned back to Mira, his expression serious. But memories fade. The current political leadership is 2 generations removed from the war. They see humans as just another species, maybe dangerous but ultimately manageable. They don't understand what we learned, what it cost to learn it. That's why they're proposing increased military spending, why they're talking about expanding coalition influence again. Mira felt her heart rate increase. Do you think there could be another war? Not if people remember, Reth replied. That's why I'm talking to you, why I'm telling these stories. If the galaxy remembers what happened, remembers how badly the coalition lost and why, then maybe we won't repeat our mistakes. But if we forget, if we let pride and ambition override the lessons we learned, then yes, there could be another war. And it would be worse than the first. Reth explained that humans had continued developing their technology and military capabilities. They'd learned from fighting the coalition, incorporated captured technology, expanded their industrial base. Current intelligence suggested human military strength was several times what it had been during the war. If conflict erupted again, the coalition wouldn't just lose. They'd be destroyed. That's what the politicians don't understand, Reth said, his voice rising with frustration. Humans aren't weak prey that got lucky once. They're a species that evolved to be survivors, that developed intelligence specifically to overcome threats that should have killed them. Fighting them isn't brave or strategic. It's suicide. And bringing them into conflict again would endanger every coalition world. Mira asked about the vote happening that afternoon, what it would decide. Reth explained that the council was considering funding for new weapon systems, larger fleets, expanded military bases. The proposal's supporters argued that the coalition needed strength to maintain order and security. They claimed that military power prevented conflicts by deterring aggression. They're using the right words, Reth said bitterly. Security, order, deterrence. But the underlying assumption is the same one that started the human wars. The assumption that the coalition knows best, that we have the right to impose our will, that our strength justifies our actions. It's the same arrogance wrapped in different language. Reth had submitted a formal statement to the council, detailing his experiences and warning against military expansion, but he didn't know if anyone would read it, much less take it seriously. Politicians wanted to appear strong and decisive. Cautionary tales from old veterans didn't fit that image. That's why this recording matters, Reth said, gesturing at Mira's equipment. You'll publish this, make it available to the public. People will hear what actually happened, not the sanitized version in textbooks. Maybe it won't change the council vote, but it will plant seeds of doubt. It will make people question whether military expansion is really in our best interest. Mira promised to distribute the interview as widely as possible. She'd send copies to news organizations, educational institutions, historical archives. The truth about the human wars would be available to anyone willing to listen. Reth nodded, satisfied that he'd done what he could. I want to tell you one more thing, Reth said, settling back into his chair one final time. Something I've never told anyone else. On the last day of my military service, when I finally retired after 30 years, I did something unusual. I sent a message to Earth, to their diplomatic service, asking if any human veteran of the war would be willing to talk with me. A month later, Reth received a response. A human veteran named Ruth agreed to speak with him through secure communication channels. They talked for 3 hours, sharing stories, comparing experiences, discussing what the war had meant to them. Ruth had fought in the defense of Earth, had been part of the militia that attacked Reth's landing zone in those early days. We'd probably tried to kill each other, Reth said with a strange smile. We were on opposite sides of the same battles, shooting at each other, trying to survive. But talking to her, I realized we had more in common than I'd thought. We'd both been following orders, both trying to protect what we valued, both traumatized by what we'd experienced. Ruth told Reth something he'd never forgotten. She said that humans had been terrified during the war. Despite their victories, despite their successful defense, they'd been afraid that the coalition would never stop, that eventually human resistance would break and Earth would fall. They'd fought so hard not because they were naturally violent, but because they saw no alternative. It was fight or die, resist or be enslaved. That conversation made me understand the final truth about humans, Reth said softly. They're not monsters or super soldiers or unstoppable warriors. They're just people who refused to quit when quitting seemed logical. They chose survival over surrender, hope over despair, resistance over acceptance. Any species could make that choice. We just never had to, never faced circumstances that required it. Reth stood, indicating the interview was truly over now. He had to prepare for the council meeting, had to try one more time to convince political leaders that military expansion was dangerous. He didn't expect to succeed, but he had to try. That was his duty now, just as fighting had been his duty during the war. Remember what I've told you, Reth said as he moved toward the door. Share it with everyone who will listen. The human wars weren't about human superiority or coalition weakness. They were about what happens when arrogance meets desperation, when a powerful civilization attacks a species that has nothing left to lose. We learned that lesson at terrible cost. Don't let the galaxy forget it. Mira watched him leave, this old soldier carrying the weight of memories and the burden of warning others. She looked at her recording equipment, at